G'day. The other day I showed you how I make up the tricky part of a 3-ball handle, and I used my ball turner that I made probably 12-15 years ago to do that. It's looking a bit battered. The standard that I made it to is not as good as I would make it to now and would like to see, and so this video is in 2 parts. The first part is I'm taking that one apart and just showing you the various bits and pieces that go in it. But then I'm doing a little bit of remedial work to fix up a few features that I have over the years have found lacking. So this is the revised version, but I've now got a conical seat in here, for example, to try and keep this a little bit steadier. I've got a graduated dial, I've got left-handed thread, and I've got far greater travel. Maybe a little bit reduced range, but I wasn't really using that top end anyway. The balls I did were probably up to, I don't know, 30-40 millimeters in diameter. So this should be perfectly adequate for this. This will go up to 60 millimeters. I think I've got that sort of travel, 35 millimeters. So roughly 60-70 millimeters perhaps, depending on what the tool is doing. So that's what this video is about. This is basically it, my ball turning device, and as in the previous video, this is an up and over style, so basically that sits on the tool post and then this bit rotates back and forwards. So what I thought I'd do is I'll just basically take this apart, show you how it works, and then look at how to improve it. I first made this, what would it be? 10, 12, maybe even 15 years ago, and it was to do a handle, and since then I've used it off and on for bits and pieces. I've always promised myself I'm going to fix it up a bit and make it a bit better, but I haven't yet. This is as good an opportunity as any, I guess. So one thing you didn't see too much of on the previous video was the handle. There's a handle that clamps on there, and it's basically that, right? Nothing terribly sophisticated about it. One day I want to put a worm drive on there, but at the moment this works quite all right. That just, once I've set it up, this bit clamps on there, clamp it up, and off I go. The key thing to this, and pretty much any milling or turning operation where you want to get a smooth finish, is slow. And so when I'm early on in the cut, I'm just sort of ripping back and forth. As you get close to finish size, you need to slow down. But So this is the handle. So if anybody says, yeah, but how do you drive it? This is it, all right? And this is what, I don't know, 300 millimeters long, something like that. So not terribly high leverage. I just have to be careful when I position this that I don't run into the handle on the tool post. This is a custom fitting that I made up to go onto my tool post. These parts are actually available from Aloris as a spare part. So if you're wondering, where did I get this lot? Well, it's actually from Aloris. And I did it this way because, once again, you want things as rigid as you can. And so this was one way of getting that rigidity if I mounted directly onto the tool post rather than having a standard tool holder and then having a flange on here to mount. Does it make much difference? Probably not, but that's what I've done. There's a shaft that goes right the way through there, and this is just a nylock nut, and it's a homemade nylock nut. For those of you wondering how do you make a nylock nut, it's pretty straightforward. Get yourself a piece of hex stock and making up a nut, and then on the end of it, or make some hex stock, then on the end of it, turn basically a tube like that. Okay, and if I looked at that in as a section, I'd have nut, I'd have maybe a small step there, and then I'd have tube, and the same on this side. Right. Then what you're going to do is make up a nylon ring that just sits in there, and then peen that over with a hammer. Okay, and that's all that nut is. So you know, nothing highly sophisticated about it. The inside diameter there, I'd make that probably the tapping drill size for if you were cutting that through with a tap, maybe even a little bit bigger. But that's how you get a nylock nut. This one is I think it's a 5/8 nut, but yeah, whatever. It doesn't make much sense to make them for common nuts, but every so often when you get a strange size, it's probably worthwhile doing. There's the nut there. Nothing terribly exciting about it. So you know, pretty straightforward to make. I used a nylock because I didn't want this thing shaking loose, and so what I've got there is just it's a collar. Think of it as a thick washer, which allows me to have a smooth cylindrical shaft there, and then have a threaded part here, and that's all that's doing is applying pressure. And this is mistake number one when I made this. That is a smooth bore, okay, and that's a straight shaft, and that will do the job. But what I probably should have done was put a conical section in here and on this end to give me a bit of a how would you say, bit better location, because if those holes aren't properly to size, that can still shake up and down. Okay, I can adjust free play this way using the nut, and that's why I've got a nylock, so it won't shake loose. But yeah, this way in particular at the front here, it needs to either be size for size or you know, very close to, or you know, you run the risk of getting a little bit of shake in there. So if I was making this again, that's probably one of the things that I would do. I'll have a think about that as I go on. I may be able to fix that as we go. This piece here is two parts. That shaft goes into here, and then I've got a roll pin there, and I've also got a roll pin through the end. That's actually a bad idea because I can't get that out now. This one I could knock through with a pin punch. That one is stuck, so I'd have to try and drill that out or do something to get that out. So in hindsight, probably not the best thing I could have done. I do like the idea of having the pins at crossways, but probably what I should have done was put one in sort of that way and then one in there, so that they are still at 90 degrees to each other, but I can knock them out. It doesn't matter because I'm not planning on demounting this from here, even though that thread looks pretty gnarly. It's working, so I won't touch that. The carriage itself, you can see there's a gib there, and I've got some grub screws here with nuts just to lock that in place. So that's how I'm getting my, should we say, you know, reasonable fit out of this. If you're good enough, you can probably machine that out of solid and hope that'll work, but the slightest bit of wear and you're in trouble. So that's maybe not such a good idea. That's just a bit of M6 thread with a nut. There's a, I'll see if I can find the right size grub screw there. Yep. So there we go. So that's how I secured the knob to the thread here. Was the internal is threaded to go onto the thread, and that's how you get the adjustment. And then this bush with a grub screw through it just locks onto the thread somewhere. Not the most sophisticated things, but it works. To get some decent bearing, things here have been greased, but I've also got a couple of Mylar washers in there just to rub on, so I haven't got steel on steel, and that's what allows me to push this thing up and down, is that screw thread on that bracket. It's actually quite tight, so I'm going to slacken those off. There's the slide off the dovetail. So on this side I've got the screws for holding in the cutting tool, and they actually go right back to here. This is one way of doing things, but it means that if you're swapping between, if you're doing a small ball and then a slightly larger one, you may have to swap between posts, and it's a bit of a pain in the neck. So that's one thing I'm going to be doing is getting this back down to a better, what would you say, a better arrangement, and you'll see that in a moment. The tool itself, that's just a bit of mild steel with it's a bit of broken tap. I break taps occasionally, so the bit down near the cutting edge is generally reasonably good steel. As you get further up, as I've done here, it gets worse, and so this cutting tool is no longer anything to write home about, and I'll be putting a bit of tool steel or something in there, I think. But that's another thing that I'll get to in a moment. So a few things to change that I want to change here. One is I want to get rid of some of these holes and just have one with a longer bolt on there. That's an M6 right hand, so I'm going to put an M8 in there, but it's going to have but I'd like to put it make it a left hand, and that's just so that the knob feels a little bit more natural when adjusting things up. So I'm going to put a left hand in there. You may or may not have left hand taps. I find, and the M8 left hand I've got is from a job I did at work, probably 15-20 years ago. But I find when buying special taps, I always try and buy the special die with it, and that way at least I can do things like a thread and a nut. So you don't find yourself in a situation where you say, oh, well, I can cut the nut for a left-hand thread, but I can't cut the bit that it goes onto because I haven't got the die. I've just started preparing the blank for the M8 by 1.25 left-hand thread, but I thought I'd mention this trick to you. Someone suggested doing it for the ball turning stuff, and my response was basically the way I do them is the way that I'm showing. I've never done it this way, but what I have done here is, this is a bit of 3/8 rod. I don't want a center in the finished, or at least a large one in the finished item. So what I've done is I've put a center in the end of the 3/8 rod, and I'm using a center to support that while I prep and then thread this thing. But what I'll then do is I'll part that off as a last thing, and so I'll have my thread. It'll be nice and concentric with the axis, but I won't have a great big center in it. So that's one thing you can do. I think I mentioned in a video of some time back, you could also have this thing as straight with a and make up a little pocket tip, whatever you want to call it, to go over it and put a center in that. That needs to be reasonably tight fitting, but this one is another way of doing this sort of stuff. This is about 8.5, where I've come in with the parting tool to give my normal tool a little bit of room to come in and do its thing. But I'll clean this up to 8, or just a little bit under 8, and then I'll probably put a run out groove at this end and a run out groove at this end, just to make the threading a little bit easier, and then off I'll go with a left hand thread. Last thing I'll do, part that off, and then I can run a die down there. I think I've mentioned this before a couple of times, and other people certainly have, but at the moment I'm cutting a dovetail on the back of my new slider block. I was going to cut this one down, but then there were lots of holes in the way and a few things didn't work out the way I thought they would, so a new one. But what you do, these are a couple of diameter 5 dowel pins, and so I've got those in there. I'm going to measure across that with a caliper and then put that in there and measure that, and when I get that dimension with the pins matching this dimension with the pins, I know that my dovetail is the size I need it. If you try measuring to the corners there, you've got to worry about having rounded off cutters, corners on your cutters, and also positioning your measuring gear. So the usual way to do it is a couple of dowel pins like this, or bits of drill rod, or even some old some new drill bits, just so that they're not scored up or anything like that. And that's how you measure the dovetail. So I've taken that to depth, I've put this side in, and that was basically by measuring from there to the dowel, there to there. I'm now starting to nibble away on the other side there to get that dowel, and then I'll have my dovetail all done. Most of the work I've done is on the slide part, but one thing I have decided to do is put a conical seat on the bearing bush here that I've got, and the reason for that is just so that when I tighten that shaft up, it pulls into a seat. At the moment there's a little bit of clearance between the bore and the shaft, not an enormous amount, but enough to give myself a bit of a wobble. So I'm figuring if I put a cone on the front seat here, then that should, fingers crossed, give me a what would you call it? A bit like a taper bearing, a nice taper fit that as I pull the shaft back, it centralises it that way, as well as taking out any slack. The last time you saw this piece, I was putting the dovetail on the back. Since then I've drilled and tapped for some grub screws to hold the tool in. I've drilled and tapped for the Gibbs screws, and I've drilled and tapped for the height adjustment screw. That was probably the trickiest one because it was left-handed and I kept wanting to turn it to the right and wondering why it wouldn't cut. So there we go. I've also, this part needs to be remade entirely, I think, but I mean, there's nothing greatly wrong with it, but it's not the way I do it at the moment. However, I have heat shrunk a tapered bush onto here and put a taper in my front brass bush. When I first made this, I wasn't enormously happy with the fit of the shaft in the bush. There was just a little bit of movement, and so, you know, while looking at this and thinking about it, I thought, okay, I can put a taper in there. So I've put a 30 degree, it's actually a 60 degree cone, but a 30 degree on the lathe, and that'll go in there, and it means that when I've got that snugged up, this thing is going to be a lot firmer. It's not going to be able to go up and down like it was before. The nut's now on. I did that off camera because it needed to be put in the vise to get it. That's giving me a reasonably smooth sort of travel, but with no wobble that I can discern there. Next bit to put on is the slide. Now, if you remember the previous slide, it was long, it had 4 holes in it, and it only had about 20-25 millimeters worth of adjustment. This time I've gone the opposite direction, and I've got a long nut with a thread right down the bottom, and I've got quite a lot of adjustment, and that's because when I had the 4 holes there, it gave me the range, but it meant that if you were in an awkward spot, you had to stop, take the tool out, reposition it, start again. And so this, I'm hoping, will mean that I don't have to do all that. When adjusting these things up, by the way, I usually go till they're tight, and then I'll come back and, you know, just back them off just a fraction of a turn. There's the adjustment dial. Now, that's the old one, about the same size, but on this one I had the bush screwed onto there, and then I had a grub screw to lock it. On this one I've just got a plain bush, no thread, but still got the grub screw to lock it. I've got a mylar washer between there and there, just to give myself some smooth movement, as well as a bit of Vaseline. The main difference here is that this one was a 6mm right-hand thread. This is an 8mm left-hand thread. And that's just going to make it a little bit more intuitive when trying to adjust these things down. The other thing I've done to the dial is put graduations on there. And I've put a mark on the plate that holds it. That plate used to have a sort of a Z shape to it, but I've now got that flat. The graduations on here, one turn is 2.5mm on diameter on the ball, and so I've got 25 graduations here. So in theory, I should be able to wind it back if I'm chasing a size 0.1 of a millimetre without too many problems. What I'm also going to try is one of these. This is an ER11 collet holder, bought off eBay, nothing terribly expensive or anything like that. I'm going to trim this down and use that. Then I'm going to use a bit of round tool steel with a bevel on it, so I'm getting sort of tangential cutting. Not only will that give me a more durable and better cutting edge, I think, than this. That's the revised ball cutter, ball turning device, whatever you want to call it. Thanks for watching. See you for the next one.